Morning everyone, welcome to, thanks to members and staff here for being in on a grey, wet, drizzly morning. We've got a suitable number of members of the public, i.e. none on a grey, wet, drizzly morning. We may well have some people watching online or who may be able to watch the archive version of it afterwards, so welcome to anyone who is tuning in for this. Welcome to everyone here. We might as well do the usual round of introductions in the moment. I don't think I need to tell everyone here about toilets, fire exits, etc. As usual, no fire alarm test as far as I know. Let's just start off with the introductions. And I'll go around this way and then certainly for Councillor Fox and Councillor Iqbal, if you can just say in what role you are given the changes yesterday. So I'll go over to, I should just say, I'm Councillor Douglas Johnson, Chair of the Committee of Council for City Ward, and we'll pass over to
Councillor Penny Baker, Vice Chair, and Councillor for Stannington Ward.
Alan Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield Ward.
Councillor Terry Fox, Manor Castle Ward, and substitute for Councillor Paul Wood of Woodhouse Ward.
Paul Turpin, Green Councillor from Gleadless Valley.
Alison Norris, also Councillor for Woodhouse Ward.
Nabila Maulana, Councillor for Park and Arbourthorne.
Councillor Masri Iqbal, I'm now a permanent member, Chair, so you'll have to find some other joke. So I'm a Councillor for Darnell Ward as well.
Thanks very much and welcome to the committee. It's obviously not the first time you've been on this committee recently, but yeah, you're here as a full member today. So thanks for that. Just want to check that everyone's got the full pack of papers. There's a couple of extra bits which we'll come to when we need to. I'll just ask the officers here to introduce themselves. So I might just go around to clockwise fashion as we're here, starting with Rob.
Good morning, members. I'm Robert Parkin, Assistant Director of Legal. I'm the Legal Advisor to the committee today.
Good morning, Ajman Ali, Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services.
Jonathan, do you want to just say who you are for the record?
Yeah, I'm Jonathan South, I'm the Service Manager for Sport Housing.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Dean. Right, thanks. For people not sitting at the mics, then if you can just repeat that when you go and do your item there. Okay, just a reminder to put phones onto silent. You mind just beeps there. Covered everything on that? No more preliminaries, are there? Okay. So we'll go on to item 2, exclusion of press and public, because there is part of the report on item 11, the budget pressures, which is closed to the public and therefore hasn't been published. Essentially, the reason for that is that the whole budget setting process is a work in progress, and it will be unfair for anyone to read about proposals that might affect them directly in the press before they've had it discussed through the proper channels. So it's out of respect to those staff and any tenants that's kept out of there. Councillor Fox.
Just a clarification on that, if I can, Chair. Will you give us some guidance on what we can discuss in public to what we can discuss in private? Because I don't want to tread over if there is issues in there that we need. So just a bit of guidance on when we get to that item, if we can. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So just to clarify, so the only closed part is on item 11, which is the final one on the agenda, so we're open up to that point. In terms of the running of this committee, then what I propose we do is we start off with item 11, we'll be open as normal. We'll ask the Director of Housing to present the open part of the report. We can then, I think, take questions on the open part of the report. And if at that point we need to have discussion about the closed part, we'll then close the meeting and turn off the webcast. But we will have to come back and reopen that to record our decision on the item publicly. If we feel we don't need to close the item for a closed discussion and can make the decision without that, then we can keep the whole meeting open. But I was just proposing to deal with that at the time it arises in the agenda. So for the time being, it's all going to be open. Okay, thanks for raising it. Rob, is that okay from... Yeah, thanks very much. Right. So that deals with item 2. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Not expecting any, so I think we'll take that as none. Rachel. Minutes of the previous meeting is item 4. Now you find those on page 11, first of all. So this was the meeting in September. I just wonder if we can check if these are an accurate record of the meeting. Would someone like to propose that? Paul, you're saying it's an accurate record, and yes, you were here in September, present, so we've got that accurate. Should we resolve that is an accurate record of the meeting? Just want to ask about any matters arising. Does anyone else, I've got 2 items here, does anyone else have anything to raise on the minutes? No. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. It was a suggestion. It's not reflected in the minutes. It was on the repairs, and because we'd been at council there previously, and there'd been a motion by the Liberal Democrats. It's just how do we take the politics out of keep on bashing the repair service? And Councillor Turpin had suggested something similar. We worked on the local plan where we were cross-party working group. I mean, the service had another knock yesterday publicly, and for me, it's a service that represents the city as a whole, and it's had some challenges pre-COVID, and it just needs us to say to Sheffield is we're doing the best we can. I would like us to have a session at some point, but just want to take the politics out of it, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's probably best to treat that as an observation rather than something that needs amending in the minutes. But yes, I mean, as an observation, I think it's really important, isn't it, that we respect our large number of staff who are doing a difficult job in difficult circumstances, and also reflecting the fact that, as members, we've got to ensure that, there's continuous improvement in the service so that the tenants get the best service that we can give them, which is no surprise to anyone that's challenging. Okay, that's good. I've got 2 items in the minutes I just want to raise briefly. First of all, on item 6.2, Councillor Woodcock, we promised you a written response to a question you put in, and I just wanted to ask if you had received that. If you recall, let's just assume that's an action still to do. So, which probably means you probably haven't received it, probably because I haven't given it to you, but I don't know and I'll need to check. But from an action point, can we recall that that question is still outstanding? Because if it is, then it needs dealing with, and that's no doubt my fault. Thanks, Alan. The second point I wanted to raise was, on 11.3.2 on page 16, we asked, as a committee, to have an update report on the complaints handling in 6 months' time. That would take us to March 2024. And I wanted to make sure that's reflected in the work plan. Perhaps rather than a matter arising, Rachel, could you give me a nudge when we come to the work plan, and we should make sure that's explicitly written in, because if we've taken the trouble to focus on that, we ought to have it explicit in the work plan, I think. Yeah. Okay. I think that covers the minutes from last time, so we'll move on. So we're on to item 5, public questions. So we've got no one present today. We've got one set of questions sent in from Dave Cronshaw. Now he's not present, and proposing that we will send a set of written answers to him. So the questions, I think 6 questions in all, and they should come and be published on the website. So I think we can take it forward from there, really. The questions relate to housing investment, the Newstead estate, and I think they're always on temporary accommodation. So I think we should deal with it that way, and we'll put those on the website in due course. I don't think we have any other public questions, do we? No. No petitions. So let's move on. Item 6 is members' questions, and I don't think we have any of those either. So item 7 is the work programme. So shall I hand over to Rachel Marshall, who I didn't ask to introduce herself before, so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Introduce yourself now.
I'm Rachel Marshall, Principal Democratic Services Officer. Good morning, everyone. So in the main agenda pack on page 19, we start off on the work programme. On page 20 at the bottom in the references, I'd just like to draw the committee's attention to the addendum, which has been published as a separate piece of paper. You should have that on your desk, actually. So that's just in reference to the renewable energy issue, and there is proposed action down there for everybody to see. That has also been published on the site for transparency to the public. Moving on, sorry Chair, did you want to come in?
Can I just check on that? So to confirm that, so we're going to add that to the work programme. Well, it's actually to the strategy and resources, isn't it? So yeah. We've got the commentary there. I think everyone's got that piece of paper. And just to draw attention to adding to the work programme the request to consider the issue on council's powers and resources to protect migrants from discriminatory housing regulations, etc. And that's the advice there is that we can bring that to the January meeting. So I think we just wanted to note those. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So moving over on to page 22, which shows the Appendix 1 and any proposed amendments. So you can see there all the items that have moved or have been scheduled for forthcoming meetings. Anything that's also been taken away and why. Moving on to page 24. You can see part 3, so that's the agenda items for forthcoming meetings, what's planned. That's down to you as a committee to shape further if you wish to. So I do believe I will now pass over to Ajman to discuss something that we want to add to a future meeting.
Thanks very much. Yes, want to come in there?
Yeah, thanks very much. So over the summer, officers have been undertaking a self-assessment on the Ombudsman's recommendations on damp and mould. And I think this committee had a report on the update of that in the September meeting, which you considered. So what I put in place is some further work that needs to be done. So to put some mechanisms in place to give further assurance that the Council is addressing the questions and issues raised in the Ombudsman's recommendations. And as part of that process, I'm going to be organising a further deep dive session for members of this committee to attend probably before Christmas to review that self-assessment and the outcomes of which will be fed into an updated version of that in due course. And in addition to that, what I've asked officers to ensure is that we have an independent external review of both the final self-assessment to ensure that both officers and members of this committee and the Council have the assurance that we've carried out a comprehensive and accurate picture. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and I know it was discussed at the last meeting to bring a further report probably in March of next year. And what I'd like to say is that we ought to perhaps bring that forward so we have a further update in January and then subsequent reports later on. So that's what I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, that's very helpful. I mean, I think it's fair to say that damp and mould is something that's concerned this committee a lot, rightly. So there's 2 courses of action proposed there by the Executive Director. So the first one to be scheduled is to have a deep dive session. So I think we're proposing something like an expanded knowledge briefing where we can have time in an informal session, not in public, to actually look at what is actually happening on damp and mould. And I think that's going to be really important for us to bear in mind when we come on to the item on regulation of the regulation and standards, to show that we are actively as a committee engaged in that issue. And then following that, to have an update report to follow up where we got to in September. Do we have a proposed date? Are we looking at the January committee for that? Or
I think for the deep dive, we will try and get something before Christmas, and we'll send some dates around for members, but then for a further update on self-assessment, I would suggest that we try and accommodate that in January if the agenda allows us to be able to do that.
right, thank you. Well, in that case, I'd like to propose that we formally add the damp and mould update review to the work plan and schedule it for January. If for any reason it can't be done in January, then we can move it, but I think we should have that on the agenda so that we recall this conversation. And with the deep dive session, you know, it's always difficult to get people together, but can I ask committee members to take this as a priority, because we don't get enough chance to have those quite detailed discussions on particular topics with each other, and I think it is important that we really do that if we can. So, do I have any other questions on the work plan as published or with those additions? If not, then are we happy to approve the work plan with those additions? The recommendations are formally on page 20, and they're in the usual form. Shall I take, no one's dissenting, shall I take that as agreed? Yep, okay. That's agreed unanimously, Rachel. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for everyone's input to that. So the next item, we're on to the substantive items now. So we've got 4 of these main issues. And just to say, so what's I think we're proposing is that, so item 8 is about the regulation and our response to regulatory consultations. We can have a bit of time for discussion on that. I'm hoping that items 9 and 10 will be relatively short, and that will allow us more time for item 11, which is the budget pressures. So if we go to item 8, on the housing regulation, who actually wants to kick that off? Is that over to Janet as Director of Housing and Neighbourhoods? Over to you.
See is moving forward, obviously, is regular updates in terms of where we are with, in terms of the housing regulation, and also to make sure we're compliant with those regulatory standards. And that is obviously in terms of our response to the consumer standards. And also has been mentioned a number of times in these committees, is that we are getting more and more clarity in terms of what those standards are, what we need to do, and to ensure that a compliance. And obviously, we are responding, you know, quickly to, as further information comes in, to make sure that we understand what is required of us by the regulator. And as you will have seen previous reports, we have got the regulator of social housing, we've got the building safety regulator, and obviously an increasing role for the housing ombudsman. So we will provide obviously regular updates to this committee on those. The report that you have here today, agenda item 8, is a brief overview of the latest regulatory developments impacting the social housing sector and how we're going to respond to those. And attached to this is also the latest consultation that we were asked to comment on. And we've agreed previously at this committee that any time that we respond to the government on consultations, that we have that discussion through our knowledge briefing sessions, and also discuss with our tenants through our various forums, and also we bring them here so we're all clear what we have said back to government. So attached as Appendix A is the draft response to that, that obviously we have been in dialogue with the government team on. I didn't plan to go through all of the report because I do think that it's fairly self-explanatory. Happy to pick up any comments, but I think this is a moving feast, and I think, you know, we will see more and more reports coming to this committee in terms of how we are responding to the new regulations.
Thank you very much for that introduction there. It's probably right not to go through the report in too much detail so that we can ask questions. Just to clarify on the responses, there are two responses attached to the papers. So page 44, we've got the response that has already been sent in because that consultation is closed on the standards. And then on page 47, we've got the consultation on the fees for the cost of regulation, and that's still in draft because that's not been sent yet because that consultation's still open, isn't it? So we can alter that one. I think we could just have to endorse the first one. So go to questions. Councillor Masters was first to put a hand up. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I have read through the consultation and I'm very concerned about what you disagree with. And to be quite honest, I agree with you because, I mean, there's the figure of 300,000 just for regulation. And now, where's that money going? I mean, I know it's going to come from our budget, but that will mean for us either hiring extra staff to deal with the regulation or reducing the amount of time our existing staff have on frontline services. It's such a poor deal. And what I'm really concerned about, it's sort of a sledgehammer, assuming that everything is wrong and we've got to prove that we're doing it right. So you say you disagree, and I'm with you on that one, but what notice will be taken off you? Because that's a huge figure away from our frontline services.
Yes, and this is a matter that most local authorities are raising at a time when there is significant pressure on housing repairs budgets in particular. So by the introduction, obviously, the new regulatory framework is what does happen is that obviously they look at levying a charge. We have paid many years for the Housing Ombudsman to obviously that we respond. They generally calculate that on a price per unit, as it says. And obviously we've a large stock holding, so that does affect, you know, very large local authorities in a different way. There is some dialogue that is taking place with the government teams to probably a little bit more detail in terms of, you know, how that breakdown of cost in the country is being spent, how it is being used. But also, I think one of the things we increasingly need to do is look and make sure we've got transparency about our costs for responding. Lots of things in the consumer standards I don't think anybody can argue about. It's about good standards of homes, it's about listening to our tenants, it's about acting on feedback and making sure that we're delivering, you know, really good services. I don't think anybody can argue for that. But we also need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to respond to the regulator. And we need to look at what that looks like. So I think in future, one of the things we probably do need to do, maybe through knowledge briefing, is look at the whole cost. And that includes, obviously, in us terms of making a contribution, obviously, to the regulator in terms of their fee-based charges, but also, you know, what we need to put in place and funds to make sure we're in a really good place to respond to the regulatory regime and the future inspection regime.
Thanks for answer. Councillor Master, I think that was a good question. I'm glad that you raised that, and I wonder if the committee wants to actually make a bit more of this point. Noted this response is in draft, and I wondered whether we should put a much clearer line to government that perhaps, for instance, we don't think the cost of regulation should fall on ultimately the tenants who have to pay for it if it comes out of the HRA, and the cost of regulation should be met by government because public housing is a public service. So I don't know if the committee want to endorse that and ask the director to include that, subject to any comments that you might make. Have you both got questions on this point? Okay. I'll take Paul first because he has his hand up first and then come to you. So, Councillor Turpin.
Thanks. Thanks, Janet. I mean, I wonder, you say that as a larger authority we're kind of taking more of a hit. And I'm thinking across the country with the 300 odd authorities, is there like I'd imagine, you know, is there a line graph, would you say, about how much of a hit they take depending on how big they are? And is there a point where, say, like, are there 10 core cities essentially funding the meat of this for the other 300 odd authorities? And secondly, I mean, I personally don't. Do you have any confidence that the government will change their minds on this?
I'm not saying that the larger authorities are doing nothing but other than paying, you know, an amount of money per property. So some of, obviously, the smaller local authorities, maybe with smaller stock, are probably, you know, going to face increasing pressure, you know, because they won't have the infrastructure and the ability to manage regulation in the same way that, you know, some of the large core cities have. So I think it is comparable, the fees and charges, but one of the things that we increasingly have spoken to government is that probably needs to be a little bit more transparent, a little bit like we do with the Ombudsman, where there is like a sort of a scale of, you know, how that is featured into budgets, our budgets, and that's so much more transparent. But this is, you know, this will have, you know, an impact on whether, you know, you're a small local authority or whether you're a large local authority. And certainly for the registered providers sector, they've been in this place for a longer time. The government tend to have, you know, that full cost recovery of those costs, and then that materialises in a price per unit. It is adding more pressure to local authority budgets, which obviously have been affected by lots of things over the years, and also to make sure that there is some transparency. A number of local authorities, we've had a meeting with the government team and saying we need a little bit of help and support to about how we explain to committees like this and also to our tenants in terms of what is included in that fee. So what is it funding and how does that work? Because I think that would align with that openness and transparency. So they have taken that away and they've agreed to work with a number of local authorities, Sheffield included, to look at the level of information that might help this committee and other committees in the country.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. You'd think we were running a casinos or betting offices that you could charge us. This is a public service we're providing to tenants, not a service that makes a profit. So, you know, £7 to £8 a properties. And the bit we forgot to mention is that we also have housing associations, so tenants in Sheffield are just getting whacked by the government. I do think in this position that the council is in, I think it's about 400 odd million pounds we've lost since there was a coalition and then the Tory government. So to hammer us further when we could be investing in this resource, as you said, a number of colleagues have said, in staff and providing services to our tenants, that's where the money should be directed. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Chair. I think if we can write back and if we can get RSLs on board from the city, because they're obviously facing a bit of a higher fee than us, £9 to £10 per property. So, you know, if we've got a few allies, and if we can, a bit similar to we did with the motion, Chair, direct that to our MPs as well and ask them to raise it as well on our behalf. But as I said, you know, we're not running casinos or betting offices where we're making an income. It's more about providing services. Thank you.
Absolutely right. So I'll come back to you in a moment. I mean, so I think it sounds like everyone agrees on that point. We just want to check there's no practical obstacle to doing that, but I'm suggesting that we just put in a clear statement, basically saying that government should meet the cost recommendation of regulation, and we put that in our recommendations with an appropriate form of words. Anything to add on that?
Yes, certainly. One of the things that we can do that, and because we've already had a conversation with the government team, I think we can also follow up about how to make sure, you know, if we can have the level of information that I think would be really helpful for us to have and table, you know, as part of our routine finance reports, obviously, at this meeting. I think, you know, absolutely, you know, good suggestion from Councillor Iqbal in terms of our registered providers. I chair a strategic housing forum, where we have the key housing associations that operate in this city, where we come together to work on all housing matters. I certainly, that might be the route to actually have that conversation. I know they are feeling some of the pressures within their own budgets. So if we have that conversation and maybe look at what a joint response might look like, and if they're happy to do that, we can test that out and report that back.
Right, thank you. I think if you can pick that up, that would be good. But we don't need to resolve as a committee, but yes, if you can take that forward practically through the networks of all the other landlords in a similar situation up and down the country, that'd be good. I think it's a good point worth making. And I think in this, if you could put in your wording that this was specifically discussed at the committee and reached on a cross-party basis. So hopefully we should expect the government should at least consider that properly. So, okay, I think we don't need to go over that item anymore. Councillor Masters, you've got something else? Yes, go ahead.
I mean, sort of basically, I mean, the government's imposed this, and I'm really worried about the stress on the staff. How many hours, have you any idea how many hours officers in this council have devoted to this? And I've got to thank you for it, and I doubt if you can put a cost to it. But any idea, because it's taking a huge burden, putting a huge burden on all of you. And for that, I wish to thank you formally while I've got the floor. Thank you. But also just how much time already, and it's not even halfway through, I suspect.
If I can make a suggestion, we are doing a huge amount of work at the moment to make sure that we are compliant with the consumer standards, and if we're delivering good service, that should be fairly straightforward. But also to make sure that we have you know, the resources in place to make sure we can respond in a timely manner to obviously get ourselves in a really good place to be able to demonstrate to the regulator, you know, that we are delivering, you know, we have challenges, but we are delivering good services for our tenants, and we are working with our tenants, most importantly, you know, in terms of, you know, how they want to receive the services and making sure that we're delivering on those priorities. One of the things that we are doing is we're doing work on a detailed improvement plan, and that is so we can look at all elements of regulation, not just the regulator of social housing, but obviously the other regulators as well, to look at about, you know, where we are, what's working well, what we need to do more of, and also to make sure that our tenants are absolutely engaged in that process. One of the things around like councils is that we can estimate cost of, you know, everything that we do, you know, because obviously to make sure we've got transparency of costs, and that obviously is the detail behind our finance reports that come to this committee. So if I can suggest that what we do is once we bring forward the action plan for the new regulatory regime that we're putting in place, that we certainly will be discussing that at knowledge briefings, but then what we do is share that with this committee, you know, the key headlines, but also any estimated costs over and above the delivery of frontline services that we're probably going to need to put in place to make sure we're in a good place to be able to respond positively to the regulator.
Thank you. I do think it's important that actually people realise how much time and effort goes into ensuring that things work. Thank you.
Thanks. Good point. Councillor Iqbal, did you have another question?
Sorry, Chair. It was on the training. I've just lost the page. Yeah, sorry, page 39, where, again, it feels like the government's letting us down. We're waiting for further details from government. Here they want to charge us a fee. They're asking us to up our game, but then aren't providing the tools to do that. So, bit of an observation there. So, have they provided any indication on when they could come back? Because, as you've highlighted in the report, page 38, what Councillor Masters referred to, the amount of work that's gone into these TCMs 22. You also make reference on page 41. The Exec Director mentioned it as well around the external housing organisation we're working with and so forth. And I just think, you know, the crux of this is ensuring that these regulations are followed and our staff are trained up. And if the government haven't provided that detail, then, you know, how are we supposed to stand all this up with all the work that's being put in? So, just like to understand if we've had any information back from government. Thank you, Chair.
There are a number of conversations taking place about what the regulators talk about, like professionalisation of housing and housing repairs and related services. We are waiting for the detail of that, but what we do know is we need to put some investment in our workforce, in our staff, and also about how we work in a different way with our tenants. There is also lots of talk around qualifications. I've been in housing an awful long time, and I remember when we had senior managers who all had to have specific qualifications. And over the years, there's been less reliant on that. And in housing, we have lots of different skills in the service and lots of people with very different qualifications rather than one housing qualification, because that reflects the services that we need to provide. We are doing a workforce strategy. And within that, we are looking at the whole range of qualifications across housing, across repairs, across our customer services, in terms of, you know, where we are in terms of that baseline, alongside trying to get an understanding of what is meant by professionalisation, what qualifications are we talking about, who, you know, and how are we going to deliver the increase in qualifications. And we're also making, as part of the business plan, proposals that will come to this committee, obviously in December, a provision for commencing that training. Some qualifications take some time to enable people to be qualified, so we've got to be really, really clear about where we are as a service and then where we're trying to get to, and also what is that path to enable that any additional training to be carried out. Alongside, we already have quite a lot of staff who have professional qualifications to do the jobs that they need to do. You know, we've got environmental health officers, we've got building surveyors, we've got a whole range of different things, as well as obviously otherwise. So that needs to come together in a workforce development strategy, so that we're both compliant with any recommendations and guidelines, but we also can manage this in a manageable way moving forward. So we are doing obviously a lot of work working with the government team. You know, we are very much working with them, you know, at the table to say, what does this mean and how will this work? We are not alone on this. You know, many other local authorities and housing associations are also in the same place. But what we will be able to do is, as more clarity comes, we will be able to inform both in terms of how we might manage this, but also then, you know, what are the courses and also what is our timescale for delivering any recommendations, and whether it is implicit that we do it or whether we can do it as part of our workforce development plans that are already obviously being developed and in place. But one of the things we do know is that we do need to put some more investment into our services in terms of our staff development and we need to be starting to make provision for that now. And I think that's important. The other thing is, it's one thing, you know, aspiring to have a number of qualifications, but we need to make sure our colleges and things like that and our training providers are geared up as well to help and support us. So once we've decided what we need to do, how we're going to do it, and who's best placed to help us to deliver those courses, and that is also working alongside, you know, our corporate HR, obviously services and our learning development services within the council.
Thank you very much. Okay. So just drawing those together, I think fair to say there's some credit to the staff who've put in all the work around preparing for regulation and overhauling our standards there. Some important messages just about the cost of that. But it's also fair to say that given that we are doing this piece of work, certainly officers are, then you know, we should welcome this as an opportunity to recognise the extent of the work and the professional nature of housing management. I mean, I think it is something where whilst we are engaged with continuous improvement, it's important that we're not complacent, because we do know that, you know, for many years, you know, many tenants have been fairly critical of housing services because it's easy to moan about them. I think actually, if there's greater recognition of the work that housing staff do, it's probably going to actually help enhance our own, hopefully in the long run, lead to a better public understanding of the complexity of housing management. So, okay, Councillor Norris, would you like to go with the question?
It's sort of moving on from the problems, the serious problems that you raised. I was just asking, it said that we were working with external housing association to try and compare our practices with what is done in other authorities across the country. And I just wondered, without adding, I don't want to add a substantial amount to your workload, but is it possible to have some sort of summary for us of how what we provide matches with the broader picture?
Yes, certainly. We're doing quite a bit of work at the moment, looking at neighbourhood standards, and that work was commenced last year to start and look at, you know, the different work that we do, our registered providers, our housing associations in the city, and also look to say, have we got comparable standards? The other thing that we are doing, and this is what I mentioned earlier, you know, through our Strategic Housing Forum, one of the work streams is learn as well, do some learning as well from housing associations who've been subject to this quite intense regulation for a number of years now. And we've been looking on their websites, we've been looking at their documents, but also taking some of their learning into how we're approaching this as well. So one of the things that we have done is we've got a work stream that's looking at that with some of our, you know, larger housing associations in the city. We work with both at a strategic level and operational in our neighbourhoods. So one of the things when we bring the plan back to the committee, one of the things we probably can do is look at those that are part of our Strategic Housing Forum meetings. We've got probably about 11 of our housing associations in the city, and also, you know how they compare, and also maybe even at some opportunity maybe to have a joint session, maybe through our knowledge briefings, where maybe we bring one or two of those housing associations along to have a discussion with members. You might find very helpful.
I think that might be a helpful suggestion. So if we can programme into our series of knowledge briefings, that would perhaps be helpful. So good question, Councillor Norris. Can you just, I suppose, a look at the recommendations on page 36? So I think we're in agreement from what people are saying. So recommend, so just a slight tweak to these. So we've got, one is notes the content of the report. I think if we just end the resolution there, because we have provided comments and feedback. So if we say, one, notes the content of the report. Two is, as written, requests of future performance reports. This committee includes a review of risks and issues relating to compliance, etc. 3 is noting the consultation responses that were submitted and the implications of the housing highlighted, so we can note that. And then to put effect to what we discussed earlier on the fees. So as item 4 on there, I'd suggest that this committee requests the Director of Housing to include a clear statement that the government should meet the cost of regulation in the response to the consultation. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. Everyone happy with that? Yeah. Take that as approved. Rachel, you've got a note of that.
Yeah.
So, and I'm assuming, Robert, that didn't jar your legal ears. Good. Okay. Right. Thanks for everyone's input to that. It's a helpful discussion, and as an introduction to what we will as a committee have to really keep tabs on through our informal work behind the scenes. So let's move on to next item now. Jonathan, you've already moved into place. Thank you very much. Would you like to, when you put your mic on, if you want to introduce your name and role, and then take us through the report, which people find on page 49 on the Commission of the Furnished Accommodation Framework. As I indicated before, I'm hoping this is a relatively short item that we can just, give the endorsement to, but obviously I'll leave it open to people to ask questions. But over to you, Jonathan, for a brief introduction.
Good morning, my name is Jonathan South. I'm the Service Manager for Supported Housing. The paper this morning that I'm bringing is requesting permission to commission a new furnished accommodation purchasing framework. The current framework was due to be recommissioned in 2019, but due to the COVID pandemic, we've delayed the recommissioning of that. There were two main reasons for that, and the advice was taken from procurement. There's been quite a period of difficulty in the supply chain in terms of raw materials for furniture, which have increased costs, and the advice that we received was to delay procurement while the market settled down, the supply settled down, which is what we've done. But obviously now the recommendation from the procurement team is to recommission this purchasing framework. We've learned obviously from COVID, where we've had to wait for supplies, difficulty with suppliers. So within this proposal, we are looking to select 2 suppliers for each lot. So we have the ability to go to a second supplier where the first supplier is struggling to supply the items that we're ordering. There are 10 lots within the tender. The award will be awarded on 50% of price, 50% of quality. Currently, the purchasing that we're doing provides for the furnished accommodation offer, which is an offer of accommodation in properties for over 3,000 council tenancies. It provides for the furniture and supplies that are supplied to the temporary accommodation estate. We also supply to the local assistance scheme, making local assistance awards and delivering items to people that are successful with those awards. It supplies to the refugee resettlement team and the work that they do, funded by the Home Office in terms of the resettlement of refugees into housing that is procured. And we also purchase on behalf of Rotherham Borough Council, which we've done since the previous framework was agreed. That most of those items are delivered directly to Rotherham, but that increases our purchasing and buying power within the framework. The proposal within the report is to procure a 3-year framework with the option to extend for another year. The total value of purchases is expected to be just above £10 million over a 4-year period if we took that 1-year extension. I would just like to highlight that there is no request for increased funds for this. This comes from within the approved council budgets. We're basically requesting approval to continue the work that we're doing in the manner that we're doing it, but by re-procuring, going out to the market to ensure that we're getting good quality items at the fair market price and that people are competing to supply us.
Thank you very much. That's a good introduction. We can certainly take questions at the moment. Just noting, of course, this is actually not a decision on the provision of the furnished service itself, but is just about a procurement within budget, isn't it? Okay, so I'll go around some questions then. I think probably in this order. Councillor Iqbal first.
Thank you. You can call me Mazza, Chair. I don't mind.
I'm just calling you Councillor Iqbal on this guy, just to introduce you for the record.
Mazza's be good. I prefer Mazza. But question. Thank you for the report. Just for some clarification, I didn't really understand the point-based system on 1.2. It says this is paid via scheme charge, which is house-based cost. 10 points, 15 points. I didn't really understand that. So if you could just provide an explanation. Second one, Chair, is regarding, it mentions that we're using audio on page 54, 4.2.6. From what I understand, I'm good to get some guidance from Robert, because we left Europe, unfortunately, sad state of affairs that was, but we no longer need those rules. From what I'm told, it's FTS. So it'd be good to understand, are we having to use European rules, or are the new government rules, rules that have come about, is that what we're taking on board? And the final point is I really welcome, as it says on 4.2.1 on page 53, contract is 10 million over 4 years. And there's an opportunity for our SMEs locally to bid for that work. So, as it says in there, it's really good that it keeps the money in the economy. So it's great news, but I hope the process itself enables those SMEs to apply, because the larger the contract, the more bureaucracy, and they can't cash flow it. So I welcome, and it'd be good if we could get some examples once it's gone out of some of the SMEs that have been successful. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks. Jonathan, you can explain the point system and then tell us what you know about the OJU process of European compliant procurement. And if you can't, then I'll ask Robert to do that too.
Okay, so the points-based process, as part of the Furnished on Demand offer, customers can opt into 3 levels of support that they pay for. And each item that they select, we have a portfolio of items which would include a washing machine, fridge, freezer, table, sofa. They have some flexibility in what they would like to have within their offer, and the points go against each item. So each item has a point-based rating. So if you select a 20 points to purchase at £22.06, you will be able to purchase a wardrobe at, I'm not sure what the full points is, I haven't brought the, but say wardrobe's 1 point, the sofa might be 1.5 points, and you can actually purchase what you need. So if the individual does have some items that they've got themselves, it allows them the flexibility to set the property up as they desire. In terms of the 4.26, that's been provided by the finance team, Robert. I don't know if you've got any assistance for me on that. I'm not fully sure on that.
Yeah, so that should have been picked up in the review. Quite right that the UK no longer participates in that set of rules that requires the official journal of the European Union, which is what it stands for. The domestic UK alternative that's now used for high value contracts such as this is find a tender.
Service, yeah.
Yep, so that picks up on a point that officers missed, so apologies for that.
Thanks for clarifying that. What's helpful. Okay.
Final point, Chair, just
yes.
on when we get SMEs, small ones, hopefully workshops, just to ensure that, because it can be quite daunting if we, and I think, Business Sheffield have been doing some great work, and I just think this is great news as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Again, as taking that point, it's obviously a good thing to support local businesses and the local economy, keep the money in the city as far as we can. Really good thing. Okay, some more questions. Councillor Molana was going to bring in next.
Thank you, Chair. It was just on the 10 million contract over 4 years, just for my own explanations really. I was wondering what that actually included, because I think if you break it down each year, if it's based on like individual property, I think it works out to like £740-ish per property. So I was just curious, I suppose, of what that actually entailed.
That's the projected full purchasing cost of all the items, but obviously within that 10 million, that is everything that we would purchase and pass on to Rotherham Borough Council. It's what we would purchase and pass on to the local assistance scheme, what goes into the temporary accommodation estate, and also the refugee schemes. So the furnished budget is around 1.5 million in terms of the purchasing of that, and the additional money, we get the income back in, but we do obviously purchase the value around 2.5 million a year and benefit from the schemes all coming together in terms of that purchasing power.
Thanks, yes. Of course, yeah.
Thank you very much. It was just like, I understood that there was no consultation. I was just wondering that we do have quite a few partners around the city who the council have an existing relationship with. Organisations like CIMAG, which do a lot of, I suppose, like cross-organisation work. And if there was opportunity to gather feedback from those organisations, even if we're not able to go to our residents directly, I do think it'd be quite helpful to consider. But I suppose it was more a request for consideration than a question, Chair, but thank you.
Thanks.
One of the things we do, and particularly in terms of the work we do on our homeless prevention, rough sleep and prevention, we have existing meeting structures with external partners that you've mentioned, and that is about how we're working collectively together to address people who are in significant hardship, and also, you know, maybe have lost their home and are getting a new home for the first time. And also other organisations who are helped in our charities and our voluntary sector who also help to support people at a local level. So what we've got is external partnerships that we come together, and where there is opportunity to do things together and work together, we take every opportunity to do that. And we've got some fantastic voluntary and community sectors and charities in the city that work really closely with us, and we would be lost without them, you know, because they're absolutely vital to preventing homelessness. And I think that was set out within our homeless prevention strategy about how we work with the sector, you know, to be able to support people. One of the things that I think Jonathan possibly hasn't picked up is that, and it's a symptom of lots of people facing real hardship in the city, that our numbers now of furnished accommodation has gone up significantly. And as our homeless is increasing, you know, and also people are, you know, either losing their homes or having to leave other forms of tenures, and obviously we are seeing a significant increase in demand on furnished accommodation, and that's another reason why I've wanted to review the procurement arrangements rather than just keep increasing. Actually, let's take a review about how we're providing that furniture and who we're working with, and also to make sure the small companies in the city, obviously, and suppliers, you know, are contributing to helping us, because it has now grown significantly from where we originally started off when we started providing furniture accommodation many years ago, and we've got to respond to that as well, and that is a symptom that lots of people are really struggling in the city. Right,
thanks very much. Okay. Right, so if you take Councillor Turpin, then Councillor Masters, then see if we can get to the recommendation, because we are after 11 o'clock now.
Thanks. So some of what I was going to say has already been covered, but thinking about, I think there's something that might be missing here is a repairs element to the contract, and I guess I want to ask, do you manage the used goods as well? You know, as properties change hands, you know, do you have a store that has things in that you can reuse, and then, like I said, a repair contract, so as things break out of warranty or not covered by warranty, but could be repaired, is there some provision for that? And then thirdly, so really good to see the climate impact assessment, because we don't see them often enough, I don't think, on reports, so I really appreciate that. I was going to ask about transport, because it says transport is not an issue, and I guess if it's going to be a Sheffield or Rotherham business, some of that is taken away, but some of the things that you'll be buying will be made overseas, and I wonder if that could be taken in, you know, if we can pressure our suppliers to pressure their suppliers, because it says that there's a target of no more carbon emissions, when I think it's an opportunity to reduce carbon emissions.
Thanks. Jonathan, any suggestions to that?
Yeah, so there's 2 points there, obviously. In terms of items that we reuse, if they're within warranty and they break, obviously we return to the supplier to get the credit or the return for that. The larger items, such as cookers, washing machines, when they're in properties that are reused, we bring them back to the warehouse, and we do have smaller local companies who will come in and will repair the items and allow us to recycle that. Generally, we'll probably recycle that through the temporary accommodation estate, rather than to somebody who's got a furnished, on-demand new tenancy with a new point system, but we do recycle that. We do other things. We've had the environmental auditors around recently, and when the sofas come back, although generally they're not reused, we do give the option of the supplier to reuse some of the wood within that. And obviously we do a lot within the warehouse in terms of being efficient in how we deliver into what areas we do deliver. In terms of the environmental impact assessment, it was quite interesting to do it, and I think it's a starting point that will maintain our position, but we will look, as we work with the new suppliers, to try and improve that position. One of the main things for us, I think, is the recycling of the packaging. But I will take on board your point, and there is within the procurement process that we've got, there are various method statements, and there's 50 points for the method statements, and one of the method statements on environmental is an environmental question which has got a 10-point award. So I think the point that you made about supply from overseas and going back to the local suppliers, I think that's something that we can look at in evaluating that as well.
Right, thank you very much. Okay. Good. Councillor Masters next.
Thank you, Chair. And my issue's been touched on by both Councillor Iqbal and Councillor Turpin. When you've got the 2.4 opportunities for SMEs, really pleased to see that in there. And 2.6 anticipated lower purchase price. Now, we've always talked economies of scales will favour the big suppliers. And I'm very conscious that when I look at the list of the lots, there's a limited manufacturing base within South Yorkshire for a lot of these items. So really, can you have SMEs been able to bid for under the existing contract? And where do you anticipate them having a toehold into this, bearing in mind the regulatory framework? And it's purely clarification. Have you thought about this, or is it just a phrase that's been put in? Thank you.
No, we have had local suppliers before. The local supplier for the sofa and upholstery was a local supplier, and it has benefited us. In particular, one example is where we've got properties that are difficult to access. We can have things actually assembled within the property because of the local supplier that we've got. So within our evaluation, we will be, and now we've got two opportunities for two suppliers on each lot. We will be looking to give opportunities to the local suppliers, obviously, because that does bring in the possibility for quicker delivery, much quicker response on issues with the items that are provided. Obviously, like say, economies of scale, some of the larger, more standard items that are just supplied and not made, such as electrical items, we're probably, the bigger suppliers are going to come in for that. But I think because we've split the lots into 10, there are much more range of lots. There's more opportunity for local suppliers to bid and be successful within that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'd be really interested to see examples as this unfolds. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. I was hoping to move the recommendations, but I think Councillor Norris has sneaked in with a new and brief question.
You might have covered this while I was out of the room. Just with following on from what Paul was saying with procurement of new stuff and in environmental standards, we're presumably looking at maximum energy efficiency for the white goods. And also, are we doing things like buying electric cookers rather than gas cookers?
It's policy that we provide electric cookers. We do buy some gas cookers, which would be supplied possibly to refugee properties where there's only gas supply. It's a one-off, but we mainly buy electrical cookers as standard. And in terms of the ratings, we had specified a minimum of B, which is what we've got at the minute, B and above. But we will be looking to try and push to an A with that with the suppliers as we procure through this.
Yeah, I wonder what the cost implications would be for pushing it up, you know, to an A or a double A or whatever, because obviously more expensive to buy but cheaper to run.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the cost implications will be. I haven't got a figure for that. It's something that obviously when I did the climate impact assessment, I looked at what the current provision was, which is a B, and we need to at least maintain that within this new framework, but I would like to improve and increase it. And I think when we look at what suppliers are providing, we'll look at the ratings that they're giving on the electrical items, and we can compare that to the cost from different suppliers in terms of if an item at a B is this cost and an item at an A is this cost. As part of the full package, we can look at that in terms of the quality and the efficiency for the tenant.
Yeah, I was just saying it would be, you know, looking at pushing it up as high as we can would be really good because of the, if we can have a look at decreasing running costs as well. I know it doesn't come out, it's tricky, it's a bit like the NHS, the bit you save by buying a more efficient appliance doesn't reflect in savings in your budget but in the on-cost for tenants. But yeah, I just would, if we can push that.
Yeah. Can I just bring in Janet, who I think wants to say something about the trade-off on cost and efficiency?
I think one of the things we need to do is obviously look at the options, but also you know, recognise that generally, you know, these are sort of like short-term interventions. I think one of the things that we probably can do in terms of our performance report, and particularly once we've been through this process, is look at the cost-benefit analysis. We've already got a climate impact assessment. As a service, we've been taking the whole service through the ISO 14001, the environmental management standards, and maybe that might be worthwhile doing an in-depth detailed briefing to the knowledge briefing, and then looking from that at what we need to include. We have a lot of indicators around the environment that are in our whole suite of key performance indicators. So one of the things that probably we can do is agree which are the indicators that need to form part of our overall performance report, so that there's a little bit more openness and transparency of some of those in terms of our goods and services. If that'd be helpful.
Yes, I think that might be helpful. Jonathan, do you have something burning to add? I'm keen to move on because of the other items, but...
I was just quickly going to add that we can take a look at that, and one thing, if the cost is marginally different, we could look at offering the option to the customer in terms of the point-based system. So that's something that we will we'll keep an eye on through this process.
Okay, just keeping some structure to the meeting. Shall we just move to the recommendations? They're very short. On page 50, essentially, it's to approve this procurement. I'm getting nods on that, no disagreement. Let's take that as resolved unanimously. Thank you very much. I mean, I just want to say to the committee, I mean, you know, of course, we do get these papers or briefings on these papers in advance through the knowledge briefings. You know, often we rattle through them and say, you know, if you have got questions, send them in to Jonathan. But just remind people to actually read these things in advance and put those questions in, because it was a surprisingly varied discussion on procurement item. Thanks very much for bearing with us, Jonathan, and answering those questions. Shall we move on to the next item, which is possibly item 10, and that's another procurement. I'm assuming, Dean, this is you. So, Dean, if you want to introduce your name and role again, and then take us through the community heating meter contract.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I'm Dean Butterworth. I'm the Council's Head of Housing, Investment and Maintenance. Hopefully this will be a very straightforward paper. Basically, in pursuant of the Public Contract Regulations 2015, we need to have a heating contract in place for our meters for our community heating properties, so that each of our individual residents in those buildings can monitor and pay for only the energy that they are using within their properties. The current contract expires on the 2nd of March 2024. The report sets out the options and basically recommends that there is only one option within this for us to go back out to tender for a new 4-year contract from the March 24. If approval is granted today, we've got enough time to go out to the market and procure this particular contract, so there's no risk in relation to the services provided. The cost within section 1.3 of the report is 1.6 million. That is a slight overestimation, bearing in mind that what we're experiencing at the moment in relation to contract inflation. It was prudent to put a higher value within there, but we're hoping that it comes in significantly less than that. But Chair, unless there's any questions, I'll leave it to that.
Right, thanks very much. Helpful and short introduction there. It sounds like a routine re-tender. Questions? There is some. Yeah, Councillor Turpin first.
Thanks. Hopefully not too difficult questions. One, how many of the 6,000 metres were being read each year? I mean, I guess the ambition is to read them all once a year. That's kind of normal, isn't it, in my experience? How many of them were we expecting to be read each year? And secondly, what's the possibility of this being run in-house? Could save some money.
The expectation is 100% of the meters will be read every year, so that we've got accurate meter readings and billings that come through to individual residents. We operate a trading account for the community and district heating scheme, so it is pursuant on us to also make sure that we understand the value of the utility costs within there, because those costs are borne by our residents who are living in those properties. So 100% meter readings very clearly, except where we can't get access to those properties, but we will make sure that we work with those residents to understand why we can't get access. I am not aware at this moment in time that this is the kind of service that we can procure in-house, but I will ask those questions as to whether we can do that. But as the report sets out, it tends to be quite a specific contract that the market provides, and it's not something that I was aware that we could provide in-house.
Just on that point, I mean, what we have in the report, and you can comment on this, is in terms of self-delivery. It says it's not an option, but it says that the council has neither the capacity nor the expertise to deliver these goods and services. So I don't know if there's anything that we.
But part of the contract, Chair, is not just reading of the meters, it's the contractor that installs the meters owns the meters. So if we go out to a separate contractor, they will have to change the meters again.
That's not what it says in the paper.
Well, we've got the paper in front of us, and it's a legitimate question. We've got an answer there. I mean, it's always something that we want to look at about bringing things in-house, isn't it? Are there any further points on that? I think the two have got other questions there. No, any further points just on that issue about bringing it in-house or not? No, let's park that one. Go to Councillor Molana first.
Thank you, Chair. It was just about a number of issues that that councillors have been talking about that have been raised particularly in Crooks and I think also in parts of Stannington. But it was about residents who, for whatever reason, if there was a fault and they weren't able to control the temperature in their flat or the hot water in their flat, this isn't so much an issue in the winter, but it can pose a massive health risk in the summer, particularly with quite elderly tenants. And I was just, I know this issue's come up quite a few times with the previous contract, and I was wondering if there were anything we were putting in, like any sort of provisions, or just any sort of, I suppose, like emergency response tactics that we were building into future contracts when we're asking people to bid for it.
This contract is just for the metering work. The maintenance of the systems is something that we maintain ourselves within in-house in relation to that. And what we'll be bringing back to a future committee meeting is our community heating strategy in relation to how we're going to make sure that the systems that we have in place are energy efficient and reliable in that respect, but also part of the conversations around how we move to new greener technologies in relation to moving away from potentially the gas systems that we currently have to new systems that we're going, but that will be a future strategy that comes to committee for approval.
Right, thanks very much. Okay, Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chair. Two points from 1.4 and 1.5. I am concerned there's no further option to extend the contract as a fallback position. So really and when you say in 1.5, constantly involving technology specialist expertise, you're confident that there are firms out there who can tender for the service. We're not going to have to be forced to go for somebody who is not up to the mark because we can't extend the contract. It's reassurance, really.
I can provide that reassurance. We've done the due diligence and there are sufficient contractors out there. What will happen over the years is we built a break-in clause in years 2 and 3 within this contract, so that if the contractor that we procure isn't providing the services that we are looking for, and also within this field there will be new technologies that are coming in during that period of time. So hopefully over that period there will be more contractors and a bigger pool to go from as well. So we're building in break clauses if we need them, but our expectation is that we'll procure a contract that can last the lifetime of the 4-year contract.
Right, thanks very much. Okay, no further questions? No, okay, thanks for presenting that, Dean. Should we go to the recommendation, page 64, impacts, is simply to approve the commission of a new contract. Do we have general agreement to that? No dissent? Okay. We're going to take that as a unanimous resolution on item 10. Thank you very much for bearing with us. So now to the bit we've all been waiting for. Going to move to item 11. Terry, did you want to come in on something specific?
Point on this, Chair. My questions are round page 80 onwards, which are papers. So, taking your advice this morning about, we'll have the presentation. I just wanted to flag up there's a number of questions on there. So whether we take that in closed session or open, I'll be guided by you, Chair.
Thanks. That's very helpful to know. We're going to have to close the meeting. So I think what we're supposed to do is stick to what's suggesting earlier on. So if we can ask the officers to present the report, we're still in open session now, and we can then take any questions that if people are very careful to make sure they just relate to the open part, and then we'll close the meeting whilst we can have a discussion of the more sensitive figures there. So yeah, thanks for raising that, Terry. Shall I go over to you, Janet, to introduce the report? Thanks.
Yes, certainly. So this is the annual review, obviously, of the Council's medium-term financial strategy, of which this committee is looking in this instance at the Council's housing general fund and also the Council's housing revenue account in terms of budgets, in terms of pressures, and also in terms of saving proposals. So this is a piece of work that we need to do. This is aligned with the report, obviously, that went to the Council Strategy and Resources Committee that's been doing a significant amount of work on the medium-term financial strategy. And also, it is the working that has taken place to review both the Housing General Fund budgets and also the Housing Revenue account. And that is to do a stock take in terms of the pressures and also how we are going to meet some of those pressures in 24-25. So if I take the housing revenue account first, so last year you will recall as a committee that we had to make significant savings on the council's housing revenue account in the region of around about £22 million, of which obviously some of those were offset by the rent increase. And also a number of saving proposals which was quite significant, alongside putting in additional investment into some key service areas, and in particular, obviously, you know, in terms of our investment, our capital investment, as well as obviously our repairs investment during that year. So for 24-25, we've done a detailed review of the HRA and also taken account of some of the pressures that we have. And the HRA is very sensitive to inflation. It is very sensitive to any sort of pay award, other increasing costs, any regulatory responsibilities, and also construction inflation, and factoring those things in, but also taking account and some things we need to do to make sure we're delivering great services for our tenants. We've also, as part of this work, you will recall previous discussions we have had, that in terms of the rents we charge, that is set out within the government's rent standard. And that standard recommends that we put rents up in line with CPI plus 1%. Moving forward, that is the rent standard. There was an adjustment in 23-24 that was introduced by the government, which we supported, but I think this is getting us back to following that rent standard, which is CPI plus 1%. If that is applied and approved for 24-25, that will mean that rents will increase by 7.7% for council rents. Obviously, we've got, probably just over 70% of our tenants that are on benefits, and obviously we would expect that their benefits are increased to take into account of that. So the report sets out for the housing revenue account that our planning assumption at this moment in time is to increase rents in line with the rent standards, but it also is taking into account the significant pressures on the service as well. So also putting some investment of things that we need to do, and where we need to increase some budgets, whilst also making sure that we can manage within the finances that are available to us. So the report is an overview in section 3.3. It sets out the HRA pressures that we're taking into account, and also sets out in 4.4 the detailed pressures that we're assuming for 24-25, and also gives the headlines of the work that needs to be undertaken to meet those pressures, so that we have a balanced position for 24-25. So included in this raw includes work that's taken place with Housing General Fund, and as the committee will be aware, that is obviously part of medium-term financial strategy in terms of its general fund budgets, largely funding services like homeless services and private sector housing regulation. So this is where we have some significant pressures. So last year, our significant pressures was on the housing revenue account, and huge amounts of work, working with tenants and also working with committee members to make sure we had a balanced position. And although there are still some pressures on the housing revenue account, the most significant pressures for 24-25 at this point in time in terms of the planning assumptions is regarding to the Housing General Fund. So one of the things that we have spoken about at committee is the loss of housing benefit subsidy with regarding to how the city is responding to increasing homelessness, and that is now significant. So we need to look at that alongside our capital investment strategy, as well as looking at how we can mitigate that risk, and that is quite significant. And it is difficult to see how that can be balanced within existing budgets within housing to meet that gap. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop looking, but it means that we have to do an awful lot of work, and we're doing a huge amounts of work with other local authorities in a similar position. We are doing lots of work with the council's revenue and benefits services, and myself and Jane Wilby will be presenting in December a joint report from Finance to this committee and maybe other committees in terms of providing much more detailed analysis of why we are losing housing benefit money to support the service. We've also got within the report headlines in terms of other pressures that we've got within those services. Homeless is increasing and some of those other pressures. So the report sets out how we intend to address those general pressures within general fund funding. So I hope that the report is fairly self-explanatory. It talks within page 77 in terms of, you know, our legal position in terms of the rules around the use of the housing revenue account income, but also with regard to the council's responsibilities for its general fund services and how this comes together into the council's overall medium-term financial strategy. It really, at this moment in time, is asking members to note the financial position. We are carrying on doing detailed work with yourselves to be able to bring forward those formal proposals. And ultimately, those will then be presented as part of the council's overall budget to both the Strategy and Resources Committee and also full council in 2024.
Right, thanks very much for that. So we've got 2 questions now, and just thinking, so remember we're still in open session now, so we'll just ask people not to refer to anything that's in the closed appendices. It might be helpful as well if you can try and refer to the paragraph or the section that we're going to ask you a question in relation to. If that's possible, just help to guide the discussion there. So we've got 3 people indicating so far. So we'll go to Councillor Baker first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just have some advice first? I mean, the item I wish to speak to is Housing General Fund.
Yes.
It is on page 71, 2.3. It is also in the closed section. Am I reading from this as long as I don't mention figures? I'm all right to discuss this in the open session.
That would seem to me to be right. Is there any difficulty with that?
I think as long as is this the table? So do you mean the table in 2.3?
I mean, I can make a question on 2.3. There's no actual amounts of money there. It is also on page 79, and it is further on in the report again, in the closed report. So the advice I was asking is if I speak to it as an item without including costs, can I do it in open session?
Yes, yes, sorry, through you, Chair. Yeah, as long as you don't go into the details of what's in the confidential appendix explicitly, I think that makes sense. It may be the answer is actually that it can't be fully answered until the closed session of the meeting, but let's let our officer lead on that point rather than me.
Okay, then let's try. So my concern on the general fund is, as you have stated, it's a really difficult bridge to fill. But I mean, nearly everything we cover under the general fund is a statutory obligation. At the moment, we're funding this to a certain extent through one-off grants, and it's been covered by temporary staffs on temporary contracts. As you have said in the report, there is a move to try and bring permanent staff in. It's more cost effective and it means you keep the experience. But we don't know whether we can do that because of the funding issues and the money that I personally feel is owed to us by the government. I think we need to be quite strong on this going forward, and part of our message should be that this is and I repeat my phrase, a statutory duty that should be funded appropriately from within the council, and then the council should battle the government to get their portion of it back. And then any one-off grants, etc., can be dealt with different, that we managed to raise, can be dealt with differently. This gives this service that actually I personally would suggest that we need to invest in the opportunity to work in the way it should, take the pressure off our staff, because they are under a lot of pressure to achieve the duties they need to do. I know we have plans to make it easier, so we're not using so much B&B going forward. I know there's a lot of thought going into what we can do to take pressures off budget and to make it a better service, despite the efforts of our staff to maintain levels. And I think we should come out with a message to SNR that we're totally dissatisfied with the situation. We thank the staff for the work they're doing, but we need to support them, Chair.
Right, so thanks. I think that's fine for the open session. So making the point that, and I think we could all endorse that we need to be really clear about the need for staff and resources for statutory services. So anything you wanted to comment? I mean, you don't necessarily need to apart from agree with that, but...
No, I'd just like to say that I think, you know, and also in answer to Robert's advice, is that this is seen obviously as a council, you know, a real challenge for Sheffield City Council. This isn't just a housing thing. This is a Sheffield City Council in the same way with all its statutory services, you know, in terms of its adult services, in terms of its children's services and many other services that it delivers. So I think one of the things that we are doing is working really closely with financial colleagues and obviously with the council's strategic leadership team in terms of how we can look at short, medium and long-term strategy. We've also, I think this week, took part in discussions with most local authorities in the country who have also got some similar issues regarding about how homeless services are funded, you know, that balance that has been mentioned between grants and also between, obviously, you know, the resources that are needed to deal with the increasing demands. This is a national issue. And I think one of the things that we are doing is we have got really good engagement with government of some of the challenges that we are facing. And I think as a collective, obviously looking at what are the options and solutions. And part of that, you know, it's now starting to bite as we now are seeing such a lack of affordable housing in the city. And as that contracts, you know, this is becoming more and more, it's putting more and more pressure on stock. We are doing huge amounts of work with the private rented, with some really good landlords, private rented, really good work with registered providers and housing associations, as well as look at what we can do as well. So that what we need to do is be moving away from hotel and bed and breakfast into providing more suitable homes, but also we continue and we must continue to invest in prevention, which was at the heart of the homeless prevention strategy that came here that we approved. So it is a complex picture. It is a national issue, and also one of the things that we are doing, but we certainly have got a seat round the table with key meetings with government teams to look at how we can look at a short, medium and long-term strategy and what are the options available. We have seen a significant increase in turnover of staff. You know, it's not an easy service. You know, there is huge demand on that service. We have protected that service to some degree to make sure we've got you know, an establishment that can deliver the service it needs. We are seeing some spike in demands in that service, and also because of its temporary funding nature, as you've mentioned, Councillor Baker, you know, around the grants that we're relying on. In the past, what we've been unable to do is we've been unable to recruit permanent staff. We've now changed that as part of the new restructure. so that, because we do know that we are increasingly getting grant support, so plan for that, that hopefully might start and reduce the turnover. And that is something that we've been working on over the last few months and with colleagues in HR, you know, to make sure that we are doing additional work and also to try and improve the way we recruit for that service, because the turnover, particularly in 23-24, has been quite significant. And that is, and as soon as obviously we're getting people in the service and trained, people are leaving, and that's not good for our customers, and it's not good for the service as well.
Right, thanks for that. Did you want to
Thank
come
you,
back on
Chair. I think I need to make it clear that this is no criticism of the staff, because I believe the staff in that area have given it an awful lot, not only thought but care, and have really made it a difference. I think it's desperately disappointing that such an important section of the council is relying on grants to fund it. And I think this is an attack on the government as much as anything else, because if we have a statutory obligation to them, they should have a statutory obligation to us in return. But it is a bit of a cry to the rest of the council, which I know are looking at it, to make sure that it's funded in a way that it can be staffed appropriately to give the service that we need to give to those who are most vulnerable in our society. Thanks, Chair. And again, thanks, because I know that a number of people who I could name have done an amazing job on this, as far as our staff is concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paddy. I'm just wondering if the committee would find it useful if we asked you for as one of our forthcoming briefings about a bit more detail on the national picture, because I mean I think we're all used to hearing that it's a national issue, which it obviously is, but it'd be useful to know, maybe in terms of benchmarking with other authorities, but to sort of get an idea about what are the pressures in other authorities and how they're spread across the board. I mean, is it an issue that's really affecting the major cities, or does it affect the Tory counties as well? It would be useful to know what trends there are, I think, in how much recognition there is of it being a national crisis, what's being done about it, and what's the sort of thinking in government to the best of our knowledge is. I mean, just want to ask committee members if it would be useful to have some picture of the national story. Could you arrange that?
We are capturing that. This is a particular issue, obviously, for local authorities within its statutory responsibilities. We are capturing that information, and you'll see there's lots of information in the news at this moment in time regarding, this position. And there is a lot of work being done collectively between local authorities. We're not on our own on this. And that's why, we've got to look at all the options and solutions available to us to be able to ensure, above all, that where we have individuals that are in urgent need of accommodation and services, that we have a statutory responsibility to provide that. There's huge amounts of work taking place to make sure we can meet our statutory responsibilities. At this moment in time, we cannot deliver statutory responsibilities without hotels and bed and breakfast, and we have significant numbers in hotels and bed and breakfast.
So that's right. Would you be able to put that in the form of a briefing on the national picture and bring that forward to one of our briefings fairly soon? That'd be okay, Janet. That'd be helpful, I think. All right. On your question, I was going to go to Councillor Fox first, and then Councillor Iqbal, and Ajman.
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to say, Janet kind of mentioned that there's been a conversation this week. I mean, the District Council Network undertook a comprehensive webinar this week, which was led by them and Eastbourne Council. I think what we could do is we could to see if we can provide the link for members to that webinar, because that is a national picture across cities, urban areas, rural areas, and sort of seaside tourist areas as well. So that's really important so that you get that insight. But equally, they made about 5 or 6 recommendations that came out of that in terms of setting out to government in terms of what the asks are. So we can certainly share the details of that with you as well.
Thanks. I think that would be helpful, and I think it would help for all members of the committee if we can have a look at that. Good, thanks for that suggestion. Right, okay, so remember we're still in the open session at the moment. Go to Councillor Fox.
Thanks, Chair. It's 4.7. The rents, am I okay to explore this a bit more? Now, last year we had a options paper that came to us about the 3, 5 and 7, if my recollection, and obviously the decision was made. We also increased temporary accommodation by 7%, sheltered housing by 7%. What I would have liked to have seen in the paper here was some more options around what, and if other members have had that discussion in briefings, Chair, apologies for that. But I'd like to have seen what the options were in it being a public paper, but also an opportunity to see what the rent backlog is and how did those increases impact on this cost of living on those tenants that do pay. And I pick up the issue about 70% of tenants being on benefits, but there's 30% who aren't, who have been squeezing every corner. And I understand where we are as an authority. But as a decision maker, I would like to see what the impact is on those of going for 7%, 5%, etc., and being an opportunity then to have a discussion around that, Chair. So can I just ask why have we just gone with what government has said? We're going for 7.7% and that's it. And I'd just like to know, so what's our backlog? What would the impact from 23-24 increase to where we are now? Thanks, Chair.
Yes, certainly, and all very, very good, good points, Councillor Fox. So what we've got here is the headlines on pressures and the work that is taking place. A lot of work is taking place. What you will see between now and between the December meeting will be the full HRA business plan. So that will include all of our capital investment, which is significant. Our increase, obviously, in budget and provision, obviously, for our repair service that's under incredible pressure. And also in terms of those frontline delivery of services, alongside obviously our income. So you're absolutely right that we have many tenants, whether they are in work, whether they are not able to work or they're incredibly vulnerable, who are facing financial hardship. When we increase the rent for this financial year, we're acutely aware of people facing significant hardship and all the work that the council is doing in terms of cost of living, of which housing obviously are part of all of those meetings. We also made a decision to increase hardship support so that, you know, if any household, you know, not necessarily on full benefits, but are in extreme hardship, or they can't afford to pay the heating bills, or they can't afford to do things, and we've seen with furnished accommodation has increased significantly, that there is a way of avoiding those people losing their home if they will work with the council, and also to make sure we've got additional interventions and support and triage lots of other support that is out there as well to help those households. Although we've seen just a slight movement in arrears, we haven't seen massive amount, and that I think is because we have a really good relationship with our tenants. They understand that they can come to us, they can talk to us, and also we will try and triage support. And we haven't seen huge spikes in evictions as a result of arrears. We have seen people working really proactively with us. So we did put some of those mechanisms in place and that investment in place. But it is a difficult position. You know, people are facing, you know, lots of hardship, whether that's people on full benefits, whether that's people on partial benefits, and whether that is people, having seen a reduction of their income. So that is why when we bring forward the full business case, one of the things that we do want to do is have a conversation about how we may increase hardship support and other things that we can do to help support very vulnerable tenants who are facing financial hardship, So we don't see it as just putting the rents up. We also see the service improvements that we're putting in place to support very vulnerable people.
Thanks very much. Yes.
Thanks, Chair, and understand that, but to make that decision to the end of those recommendations is to endorse this, then without the full information, taking it in a jigsaw kind of way, doesn't seem to me to take an holistic view. And I don't want to step into what's in the closed papers, but there are other pressures coming from the council and other charges, etc., building on for that. And I think as a committee to endorse that today without seeing the impact of what last year's increases has done, has that increased the backlog, has it increased how much was in our hardship fund, has that been fully explored, etc., etc. For me, Chair, would be kind of difficult. Seeing the full business HR plan would be more worthwhile. But I'll explore some of that, Chair, in the closed session, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to say some of that would be quite useful to have covered in the closed session and come to that. You don't need to come back anything now, do you?
No, but we would always put in the full business case, you know, the impact of not increasing rents by 5%, increasing rents by the rent standards, and that's certainly information that is readily available that we can provide. One of the things we also do need to recognise is that, you know, inflation is significant and construction inflation is significant, and obviously demand on services is significant. So if we can't increase the income for the housing revenue account, then we possibly are back to where we were last year in terms of looking at, you know, significant reductions. So it is a balancing position, but I absolutely get, you know, that we need to have those detailed discussions of all, in both in terms of income and in terms of expenditure and some of our risks.
Right, okay, thanks. It's possibly worth noting we do have to balance up, essentially for us as councillors, whether we ultimately vote for rent increases or vote for further cuts in services. So it's not an easy choice. Just in terms of this, I mean, today we're effectively being asked to sort of note this because the decision on the proposed rent increase will not be made by us, will be made by Stratton Resources, but then as a proposal, but then finalised ultimately by full council. So when we will have the full business plan in front of us. Right, so but go back to questions. So we're still on the open part. I think it was Councillor Iqbal first, then Councillor Turpin, then Councillor Molana.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's like some of us have been around here since the cut started. I mean, it's just horrendous every year, painful. I feel for politicians and officers. It's just... and then being told you've got to find that £6 million, it's just incredible. My question, so thank you for, you know, the question you asked, Councillor Barker, because I just think it's just mad. My question, Chair, is on 2.6, the business plan. I know and I'm not an economist, so it's a bit of a question around, because we can't really, the only income raising we can do is putting up rents, and there's, you know, a few services provide. So in a sense, we're hamstrung that, you know, we don't have a huge list of options where we can go to we don't have a money tree, unfortunately, either. So can a business plan, you know, because I was Googling earlier to try and find, you know, has any other council taken a leap and gone 40 years? I'm just trying to understand, you know, it's not kicking the can down the road, but in a sense, you know, those savings taken over a longer period, because I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Janet and the team for acquired some property in Darnell. After 10 years, we've got some social housing, and I know how difficult it has been. So, you know, I am grateful on behalf of our tenants, and I'd love to see that happening elsewhere. Last month we had the Hackenthorpe and other places. So the question is it possible to look at a 40-year rather than a 30-year, spread those costs over that period? And it was something that my colleague, Councillor Alison Norris, mentioned. I think it was at the last meeting, where she said, you know, is there opportunities for us to do some more borrowing, invest to save was the term my colleague used. And I'm not looking for any responses today, Chair, but I was going to ask, before the meeting, the public-facing meeting in December, I know we're going to be having group policy sessions, but I would welcome a knowledge briefing just to look at, you know, if we were to speak to government and say 40 years, what is the impact of that, rather than getting an answer today? What other, and I know we won't have many options, but what other options do we have to support the housing revenue account to have that income? Because it just seems like we're just cutting, and it just puts pressure on the service, and then we start hearing the complaints, and it's, you know, it's down to the cuts and not having the income to deliver what we want to deliver. So, thanks, Chair.
Yeah, no, that's so. The two things there. Janet, can you brief us on the significance of the 30 years first of all, but also I just want to check, we have got a date booked in, I think, and I know you've only been on the committee as from yesterday. I think we've got a date booked in next week, am I right, for having more of a detailed discussion about where we are on the HRA. So that's a very good thing, I think.
Yeah.
But if, on the 30 years,
certainly in the business plan. So we've always reported, obviously, in terms of a single year, 5-year horizon, and 30 years. In our asset management strategy that will be coming forward is over a 40-year period. And what we always do is we're always extending it. So the key of the business plan is there is a number of things. So it's you're looking at your income, but it's also looking at your spending, and that is both your revenue and your capital expenditure. And obviously we'll go through that detail next week. Also, you've got sort of like cycles of investment, you know, so it doesn't matter, we could have a 100-year HRA business plan, you know, but you will have certain things that you have to do. It's a modelling tool. So we will be bringing forward, obviously, the asset management strategy, and that's huge amounts of work working, you know, both within our repairs, our capital investment teams, and that we are looking at an asset management strategy over 40 years. And we've also, you know, as part of the business plan, you know, making sure that we've got both our revenue spending, you know, in line with demands on those services, but also making sure that that capital investment to reduce future revenue costs is absolutely embedded as a principle, you know, and as a snapshot, you know, within the 5-year investment programme, you know, there is around about £700 million there. That is split, you know, between existing stock and also any sort of acquisitions or new supply. The business plan, if you are borrowing money, you have to service that borrowing. So on our existing homes, we are then governed by the rent standard, the standard rent that comes in. On our stock increase, you've got a new rental stream that offsets the borrowing. So, but that is the work that we need to do with the committee members next week, so we can see and make sure we got that balance right. But equally, our existing stock needs quite a lot of money spending on it. And so it is making sure that we've got enough money in the business plan to make sure that our homes are of the quality that we think they need to be. And there are some significant challenges with some of the existing stock.
Okay. Yes.
Just on, because the paper does mention decent homes too, and it was thankfully a Labour government that delivered on that. I'm hoping it's the government, it's a bit like similar to what we were speaking about earlier, regulatory services. Here on the decent homes, we got a huge dollop of cash from government, and other local authorities will be in a similar predicament like us. Are we putting a case forward to say, look, you know, rather than trying to take something that we haven't got, can the government help to invest, or is it purely down to local authorities to find the cash themselves to deliver on decent homes too?
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Presently, it's, you know, all social landlords, whether housing associations or whether their local government is obviously, you know, one of the things around moving away from a subsidy situation for housing many years ago, is that it's self-financing. The challenges is with the new home standard. So one of the things that we are doing is we are working really closely, obviously, with the government to look at what is included in that standard. Now, we've got obviously, you know, a clear asset management plan of things that we need to do to the stock, you know, and that drives, obviously, our investment programmes. But what we also need to do is what will be included in a decent home standard too. You know, what is the environmental standards? You know, what is the home standards? And there is lots of work taking place on that. What we don't know is where the government is in terms of thinking on that. So once we understand what that standard is, we'll have to align that with the way we are repairing our homes, the capital investment in our homes, and also if there are some archetypes that will be difficult to achieve that standard. So we'll need to work all the way through that, and bringing forward the asset management strategy will be our opportunity to take a really good look at our investment strategy for the existing stock, and also over a longer period. And we'll also provide the opportunity to look at what we think maybe the new national standards might look like, and actually see what the gaps. But the difficulty with borrowing for existing stock means that you're then creating a revenue pressure to pay back the borrowing on the same rents that are coming in. And that's one of the key challenges. We're not alone in this. You know, every local authority and housing association in the country is struggling and looking really closely at both their asset management strategies and also their terms of their business plans in terms of the future, and some of the pressures, you know, faced in terms of what they need to do to improve the quality of homes.
Thanks, Jack. I mean, that last point about the cost of borrowing is the important one, isn't it? Just noting the 12 o'clock bell's gone, we're due to finish by p:30, and we do still need to go into the closed session. So I just ask if people can be sort of fairly brief and to the point on both questions and the answers. I'll go to Councillor Turpin next.
Thank you. So I'll try to be dead quick then. The significant cost of rising homelessness. It says that the significant part of £6.5 million pressure. I've got it in my head. It was about £4.5 million spending on temporary accommodation, which, you know, is an insane sum, isn't it? And so I just wanted to raise the point of, in our ward where there's 2 closed down nursing homes, where there's plans to demolish them, and I just think that, you know, the city's full of brownfield sites where the council said, oh, we'll demolish that building, and some of them 40 or 50 years ago, and have never done anything with the land, and I fear that this is just going to continue. And is it not worth looking at those buildings or other buildings like that? You know, it's such a huge amount of money that there's got to be scope to reduce it significantly. And so can we be looking at buildings like that? And I just wanted to ask you, like, is there a conflict of demands within the housing department where you've got the demands to provide for homeless people, but you've also got the demands to increase the housing stock, and are they opposing forces, particularly in cases like this?
Certainly, and I think you're relating to some sites within the Leadless Valley area. Certainly, I think as part of that master planning work, we have looked at a couple of those sites. Some of them, you know, probably maybe easier to develop, you know, than others in that area. What we're also doing is working with the MCA in terms of their Brownfield Housing Fund, and also with Homes England, and also what we can do, but also what housing association partners can also do in terms of new supply. One of the things with all grant funding that we find is that there are sort of rules around them. So what you can you know, what you can actually get grant assistance for temporary accommodation based on general needs, based on supported housing. And so one of the things that we are finding is that we're working with all the different funding available, so that actually it reduces our borrowing commitment ourselves. But also where, you know, some of our housing association partners, you know, are probably better placed in some instances as well to share the burden of increasing supply of very specially supported housing. And there's huge amounts of work taking place, and our chief executive, as you know, is doing huge amounts of work with Homes England, and to try and actually see how we can bring more external funding into the city to be able to increase that new supply beyond what the council can do through its HRA.
So, just regarding the cost of homelessness, that it's such a huge sum that there must be scope to invest. I mean, try not to say figures, but you know, a 7-figure sum now that will save a 7-figure sum every year. You know, and really, I think that is the investing to save options that we really need to be looking at, because, as you said, you know, the grant funding's really problematic.
Grant funding's getting easier, but that could be as well that we are probably have done an awful lot of work to be able to understand how we can make it work better as well, and particularly with the funders. So that is a positive. Within the housing stock increase programme, we have been making assumptions around increasing the supply of supported housing within that, and we've got to just make sure that's affordable. But also, we're also doing an awful lot of work with housing associations to see what they can do as well, because the demand is such. You know, that it needs a collective approach to increasing, obviously, the supply of supported housing accommodation. So that is in plan. I think as we go through the capital investment, you know, we'll be able to, you know, go through and provide a refresh of, you know, what are all the schemes in there. We're acquiring properties, we're buying properties off plan, we're using our Sheffield Housing Company to, you know, to see what that can do. And I think collectively is we need to increase the supply of affordable housing in the city, and therefore it will then make it easy to deal with some of the pressures coming through on homelessness and other needs, you know, that's presented, the demand for accommodation, you know. So there is a significant amount both within our own investment programmes, but there is also a significant amount in housing association programmes who are really keen to invest in new homes in the city as well. And we've got to work together and hit this on all fronts.
Right, thank you very much for that, yeah. Just want to, Nabil, is your question one for the closed session or the open session?
It was actually a request, Chair, to, in the recommendations for the third point, if we could change the wording from endorses to notes the proposal of for the 7.7 rent increase, but it was just a request. Sorry, it's on page 17.
Yeah, so on point 3, is it? So,
Yes, yeah, just if we could change the wording slightly, just to note the proposal of a 7.7 rent increase rather than endorsing it, because we'll be discussing it further at the February council meeting anyway.
So you're suggesting you perhaps don't want to endorse the 7.7% increase, but just to note it.
We've not had the opportunity to have a lengthy discussion at Labour Group yet. We have broached it slightly, so I'd appreciate if it could be a note, which we're happy to.
Okay, so we can, well, we don't need to make, well, I'm not going to make a decision on that right now. I just want to ask what the implications are. I mean, it's a decision for the committee. What are the implications of that in terms of the impact on decision making and the cross-committee finance aspect of things? Either Janet or Robert or Ajman?
We're not asking to make a decision on setting the rent here today. That is reserved for full council next year. What we're asking is support to make that assumption for planning purposes. This In December, we'll be obviously bringing forward the full business plan, and we're going to be doing some work next week and in the future weeks that will look at various options. That will then go forward to Strategy and Resources Committee as well as Housing Policy Committee in December. Again, as endorsement, and then it is my understanding, unless Robert says differently, that then is taken to the council's full council meeting for final approval. But one of the things that we will need to do is we are not in whatever the rent setting figure we need to agree, we will need to make sure that there are options for each of those options, so we know what we're not going to do if we can't maximise the income. And I think that's the detailed work that will take place during November, so we're ready in December, January and February before the council makes a decision on rents.
Right, okay, so just to try and wrap that up a bit, I mean, I think the reality is that whatever we say at the committee today is not the rent increase, because that's only done at the full council in February. What officers do need is the basis for a planning assumption, isn't it? So I think whatever we're looking at this as a planning assumption tool, aren't we? I'll come back to this, and you may want to discuss it in the closed session too. Do you want to come back on this point? Yeah? On this point?
Thanks. So I think I agree with what Nabil is saying, and the wording does kind of suggest that closes the conversation on that in this committee. And I do get that, you know, as far from the council's point of view, it's not a decision made, but it does sound like it's done with the committee. And so I just wondered if we can I'm not sure how far we can amend, Robert, but, you know, if we could say something like endorses in principle or endorses pending further work within the committee, or something that suggests that we're allowing officers to continue with the work as they've asked, but also we would like to look at it further before we send our own formal endorsement to SNR.
Yeah, so that's why I was saying whatever we do, it's as a planning assumption for this. But I think Robert's possibly going to give some advice on the legal and decision-making aspects of it, or something else.
No, I think the points have been made that the decision today won't bind the outcome, so it's really what the committee feels comfortable with committing itself to having done today. And if members, subject to any onward debate, are more comfortable with a formulation like endorses the principle of, or the other one which was endorses and notes the 7.4 for which officers will continue to work up. That's very vague, isn't it? I'll pin that down in my mind in the meantime. But yes, the principle of it, yes, essentially, if you want to resolve to amend the proposal in those terms, that doesn't trip anything up in terms of onward process.
Right, thanks for clarifying. So we have got some leeway there, but equally the committee as a whole does need to make a decision. Bring in Councillor Masters.
Yeah, thank you. It was just to say it endorses further work to include up to 7.7% rent increase, because Janet said there were going to be 3 options. Is that correct? So if that's the top, it makes it clear we're supporting the work involved.
Yeah, well, I think that is a good point, and if we are going to have some modelling of different possible rent increases, then yeah, I mean that's where we are, isn't it? So maybe noting the further work would be the right sort of formulation there.
Up to.
Yeah.
So specify that's the limit.
Yeah.
Well, absolute clarity, I'm not sure this committee can bind full council. No. So were it to come in through whatever may happen between now and full council at 7.8 or beyond, this committee does not have the power to bind full council, so it would be wrong to suggest that. But I think we can get something near as to achieve the sense of what we're trying to...
Yeah, bring in Adrian.
Yeah, Chair, I think there's a limit in terms of what the rent increase can be. CPI plus 1%, that's the rent policy, so we wouldn't necessarily go beyond that. We could go below that, but clearly we need an indication in terms of what we need to work with, and officers will carry out that sensitivity analysis and what the repercussions will be over that 30-year business plan, as Janet has mentioned. Thank you.
Right, so in terms of this, I mean, maybe we can just work on a formulation of some words there. Robert, if you perhaps sort of think of how you might express what people have collectively put together here. But it does seem clear that there's going to be this ongoing piece of work. We're not there yet. 7.7% is realistically the maximum that we can get to, but take the point about not formally able to bind the full council. Let's come back to that. It's 12:15, so we've got some more discussion in closed session, haven't we? Just want to check, Terry, really, we've still got questions for the closed session, haven't we?
I have, Chair, but they're quite quick, really, on some of these, so I like that.
That's fine. I mean, it might be sensible if we close the meeting now. In terms of the time limit, can we aim to reopen it before past? Well, yeah, that's why I'm asking how much we want to do. Just in terms of procedure, if we need to extend the meeting, if people want to carry on the discussion, do we need to do that in open session?
Yeah, and you can do that now, whilst noting that you still want to wrap up at 12:30, if the chair would like to do that.
Right, okay. So I think I could have an indication of how much longer people want to spend on this. Bear in mind that Terry's got at least a couple of shortish questions in the closed session. Other people will have other things. I don't know what yet.
Chair, we're spending so much time talking about how much time we're going to be using. We're probably using all the time we need to ask questions.
Absolutely right. Yeah. If people don't think we'll be done by 12:30, shall we agree now to continue to up to 1 o'clock? Shall we also now agree to close the session, turn off the webcast, and then crack on? Sorry, wait.
I was going to say, Chair, because we're noting anyway, nothing stops us from formally agreeing or noting this final item. We can then conclude business because we're only noting, and we can have as many questions as we want afterwards.
I had considered that beforehand.
Still resolving to note, though, technically. That's a decision in itself. So, yeah, it's an item. It needs to be closed by a resolution to adopt something, and in this case, you might be adopting to note it. But, yeah, we're sort of getting tangled here on a point, but...
Yeah, I think we do need to close it and then reopen. Yeah, we've had these discussions. Yeah, are we okay? Extend to 1 o'clock, closing the session now, and then we can cover those questions. So just get so we're back. So we're formally reopening the meeting after that useful discussion. I think we're moving to the recommendations on page 70. So I think I don't think recommendations 1 and 2 are difficult, but with recommendation 3, in light of the discussion we had earlier on, Robert has drafted something that I think says what we're trying to say. Would you like to read it out, and then, unless anyone's got major objection, hopefully we can endorse that.
Yeah, so hopefully I've caught what Councillor Turpin was aiming at. What I've suggested is, instead of endorses a 7.7 rent increase, the amendment, as I'm suggesting it as being captured, is notes and endorses for onward work by officers the proposal for a 7.7% rent increase. Okay.
Thank you very much. Is that workable for people? All right. With that, are people happy with the recommendations on page 70? Not, yep, not all. Okay, so Rachel will record that as a unanimous decision in that sense, and Robert will give you the written up wording there. That is then the end of the meeting, isn't it? So unless anyone else got anything else, we can formally close the meeting and say I look forward to seeing you, as many of you as possible, at the forthcoming knowledge briefings and at the working session on the housing revenue account, and then back at the next committee meeting on December the, I think, 14th, isn't it? On December the 14th. Thanks very much, everyone.